Thanks for joining us so early in the morning. We realize that you have very busy days when you're here in Atlanta, and we appreciate you taking some time out of your day to spend with us. My name is Terrence O'Keefe. I'm with Watt Global Media, and we'd like to welcome you to today's panel discussion, Judicious Use and Stewardship of Antibiotics in the Poultry Industry, which is sponsored today by DuPont. Joining me today on the panel, we have several veterinarians and one microbiologist. Dr. Bruce Stewart Brown, Vice President of Food Safety and Quality for Purdue Farms, is with us. At the end is Dr. Brian Wooming, Senior Staff Veterinarian for Cargill Turkey Products. Right beside me is Dr. Jeff Courtney, Director of Veterinary Services for Pilgrim's Pride. And also joining us, second closest to the end, is Dr. Alistair Thomas from Danisco Animal Nutrition. I'm going to be asking our panelists some questions to get us started, but we will be taking questions from the audience as well. If you have a question, raise your hand. We have a microphone in the aisle there, and also Jeff in the back of the room has a handheld mic that he'll bring around so that you can ask us. We'd like to encourage the sharing of ideas since the industry is facing a challenge, to try and reduce its antibiotic usage and to meet consumers' changing expectations while maintaining our sustainable business models. And we're all looking just to share information to help all of us do better. And speaking of doing better, I'd like to get started with one question. Way back when I actually used to work for turkey companies, we used to have a saying that what gets measured gets fixed. I found this to hold true in a lot of different occupations. Now, as part of the Veterinary Feed Directive, we're all having to do a lot more documentation when we include anything in our feed, and we're writing prescriptions now for medications on farms that we didn't write prescriptions before. My question to the veterinarians on the panel is, will more closely measuring when and why we use drugs on our company's contract farms help to improve flock health outcomes?
Sure. I'll go for first. We've been working on this subject or this process for a long time. We started in 1982 laying out this plan to figure out how to reduce the antibiotic use, maybe do away with it. And one of the things that lends itself to is the fact that you find farms that, because you're looking and holding and building a record on a particular farm, you find farms that are requiring or using more antibiotics than other farms. Especially when you pull out the antibiotics from the feed, things start showing up at the farm level that you didn't know about. So that's one benefit to measuring. And you actually can find houses on a farm that act differently. Those were probably there all the time, that most of the folks that deal with production go to a farm, and it's not usually all the farms doing the same thing. There's maybe a house on the farm that tends to need more care or more help and maybe treated more often. Once you start to build the data, they start to stick out, and you go, you know what, how about we figure out how to fix this house or work harder on this farm? Maybe that'll bring our treatments down. So just measuring the number of treatments you use, the number of the amount of antibiotics you're using in the feed, start measuring that and reducing it, and then seeing how the treatments look. Big benefit through the reduction of antibiotics.
So I think from my perspective, I look at antibiotic usage on a weekly basis. Who's distributing antibiotics to what farms? And I think there are three benefits to doing that on a regular basis. The first two relate to the culture and the service staff. I think they're much more willing to adopt alternatives to antibiotics, so things like probiotics, and they're willing to use them sooner. The second thing I see is there is more care taken in deciding when to use antibiotics, because they know that I'm going to look at what they did. And then the third thing is what Bruce alluded to, which is that you start to see certain farms or service guys that stand out. And I think there's a lot more attention paid to resolving these chronic multifactorial problems. Now that we have definitively identified those farms or barns. So those are the things that I see from my perspective.
Yeah, we're new in the antibiotic-free world. So we basically have one complex that we've been running for several years. And as far as treating birds, and I wish I knew why this was, but we don't treat sick birds there. So in Pilgrims, basically, all of the antibiotic uses, besides these two specific complexes, are for preventative use. So they're tracked. So there's really nothing changed as far as how much we're tracking the antibiotic use.
Now, kind of as a corollary, when you learn something on some of these farms, how easy is it to transfer it to other farms and then in turn to other complexes?
Well, we started working on a definition of an ABF farm and an ABF farmer. And it's from exactly what you said, that we kind of built this working definition of what we believe makes an ABF farm and an ABF farmer successful. So there might, it has to do, you learn that from this farm struggling. This farm, however, has, to Jeff's point, there's places where you put NAE in and it runs very smoothly, and you don't need to do a lot of treatments. And then there's some other places where it's a little more of a challenge. And when you start to really look back up and look at it, there's some things you pick up. This farm, here's a good working thought about what a farm needs to look like if it's going to be successful, and the people managing it, what they got to look like. What our staff, flock advisors, got to look like. You end up finding, and I'm sure all these guys would concur with this, you end up finding that really successful NAE complexes have really tight relationships between the flock advisors and the growers and the farmers. Matter of fact, they might talk every day, because if you're going to reduce antibiotics, you can find stuff early and do some other things other than treat with antibiotics. Really a powerful tool that was there all along, that this kind of had to force you into this, like a tighter relationship, everyday relationship. Don't tell me how many died, tell me what the water consumption did today. That's a big deal. That's really helpful.
Very good. Now, some activist groups and regulators are asking for more transparency for poultry integrators on the way that antibiotics are used. For example, they want to know what reasons and in what quantities. If data could be provided in aggregate to these groups, what types of data should the industry be willing to provide, and how could this be accomplished? Any thoughts?
I think there's a concept of trying to bring the situation out positively with the consumer, and by flipping it around and saying, perhaps the number of birds saved by judicious use of medication, and start promoting it from that angle, that it's a positive thing to improve bird health and improve the longevity of the life of the bird when disease challenges come forward. So by flipping that to something more positive, that there may be a route through that.
I can say one of the things I don't think works is the thought that how many pounds of antibiotics did you use last year? That for me doesn't work, because everybody knows, most people know that this particular antibiotic is effective, I'm just going to say at 5 pounds. It's at 5 pounds of use. And this antibiotic over here, really highly effective. You need like a half a pound to do the same job as this other antibiotic. So talking about pounds has never been a particularly useful thing. I'd say there's 3 things that are really useful to know and to say out loud and be ready to tell anybody that asks you. That is, what percent of the birds you raise are no antibiotics ever? So that's easy. There's none in those, right? So say that number. Say the number of farms where you used any human drug at all. And so I'm just going to say, from our perspective, less than 5% would ever have seen a human antibiotic last year. And go ahead and say then also the amount of animal-only kind of antibiotics you're using so that people understand the difference. So you say your treatment rates, last year it was 4.1% for us, the year before 5%, the year before 3.2%. Say them out loud. I'm proud of those birds. We did what we were supposed to do. Our guys are working hard to minimize them, but they're doing the right thing as it relates to that. We're 70% NAE. We've worked real hard to kind of migrate through that. I don't think every bird in the United States should be NAE. I don't think that should be what everybody's, there's some places that probably need a lot more work to get there. And that's, it does take a lot of preparation. You just don't pull them and go, yeah, 100% NAE, probably not the thing to do if you haven't worked on some of the things you got to do. That's our opinion.
So turkeys are longer lived and heavier in general. And I think in addition to what Bruce said, it may be possible to look at medication usage on the dosage per pound of body weight, in addition to what percent of the birds haven't been medicated.
Yeah. I guess from my perspective, I think we have to keep in mind the whole rule, what the VFD rule is meant to do is allow veterinarians to have oversight for the use of the antibiotics. So actually reporting to activist groups or something that really don't understand why you're using the antibiotics in the first place, I don't see much of a benefit to it. So instead of reporting the amount of antibiotics that you're using, I think it would be a lot better for you to actually spend more time educating them on why you're using the antibiotics.
For companies that have quit using antibiotics in one or more of their hatcheries, how has this impacted your 7-day mortality? And what steps were necessary to maintain performance?
We did 12 hatcheries over the past 10 years. Some of them were, and we learned something in every hatchery. They all didn't go like you'd think they would. You can't really walk in necessarily, look around and go, this is going to go really good. Or you can usually do the other. Wow, this is not going to, we got a lot of work to do here first before we do this. And it requires some capital. Kind of got to get that. Every time there's a project in the hatchery working on something, throw your 2 cents in about how that might have to do with the opportunity to reduce antibiotics or get rid of antibiotics. Every time you build something, build it with that in mind, and do that consistently, and your hatchery will change over time. Separate rooms for vaccine mixing. We put in these laminar flow hoods to mix vaccine under, just to keep vaccine clean. One of Brian's comments was sometimes there's a cultural piece to your practices. That's really true in the hatchery. Once people go, wow, you've got to mix this vaccine under that hood. Must be pretty important that we're pretty clean around here. Is kind of what they come out thinking. Well, that's absolutely right. So the cultural piece of some of those moves is just as important as the fact as what you do. You can run a hatchery. We have hatcheries running better 7 days than when they were running antibiotics. And we have better chick quality coming out of those hatcheries. Now we have pretty neurotic hatchery managers, so that's a good thing. Creates kind of a good neuroses, if you can have those. I think you can. And you end up kind of getting benefits out of that you didn't know you had, kind of like the farm, honestly. So not everyone goes like that. You have to learn. You put, like several times on the way into the NAE, we'd pull the antibiotic, 3 weeks, look at it, go, all right, wait a second, we got to do a couple things. Run it, fix some stuff, do whatever you got to do, pull it again. We got hatcheries where we did the on-off thing, and in the like 2007 and 8, where we were coming on and off, trying to learn, and that helped teach us to take those things and do it the next time. So, and again, it didn't all translate, but some of our hatcheries are better than they were before, so you can do it.
I think I've seen, certainly recently, the broad spectrum nature of the gentamicin addition in the hatchery covered up some of the failings you were seeing even further back in the line into the breeder facilities. And I think that remains a critical control point in the hatchery, but I think as that gentamicin and that safety cushion is removed, have spent much more attention moving backwards, not just the hatchery, which is ultimately a reflection of the contamination coming down from the breeder flock, either vertical transmission or even through just surface contamination. So people where I've seen or complexes which have successfully removed that gentamicin have really gone back that far to actually start the process there, improving the overall health, and that then reduces each step through that process to grow out, reducing that bacterial load going into those young chicks.
So what types of things are they having to do on the breeder farm then?
I think, again, as Bruce indicated, just paying more attention. You need more and more fastidious breeder managers in there, looking at just the general hygiene of the facilities, improving litter quality is a big thing to reduce that surface contamination, and even down to waterline issues, which are just leaking, causing your wet litter, and increasing your chance of E. coli contamination onto your eggshells. And so there's no kind of easy step. It just takes a lot more attention and a lot more support to those breeder managers to really generate an atmosphere where their farms can be improving to help the hatchery and then on forward into the process.
You get crazy focused on fluorase. You go into some breeder houses, for whatever the reason, the hens have started to lay hard on the floor. Can't do that. That's a tough egg to take to a NAE hatchery. You get crazy focused on clean nest boxes. Sometimes you go into old hen flocks and the nest boxes are that it just has gotten dirty over time, and or there's something kind of structurally about the box that's bringing a lot of litter into the nest area. So you got to figure that out. All that kind of focus on the breeder flock, letting your neurotic hatchery manager tell the hopefully progressively neurotic breeder manager that you can't send eggs to the hatchery that look like that. I'm trying to run an NAE hatchery and you're sending me these eggs. And support them, tell them, help them.
So I've got two thoughts on that from a turkey perspective. One is that the turkey industry, I think in general, moves eggs and poults around a lot more than the broiler guys. And the highly pathogenic flu outbreak that we had interrupted that flow dramatically. And I think there was a lot more moving of things around which interfered with our ability to really think about removing hatchery antibiotics. I think folks were taking extreme measures to try to assure the supply of eggs and poults, holding eggs longer, moving them around the country. So that's one thought. The second is that I think Al's comment about breeder farm management is spot on. I don't know how many of you have actually tried to clean a dirt floor. It's pretty tough to do, but it's that attention to detail over time, continuously, understanding what your downtime needs to be at a minimum. We wash eggs in the turkey industry. I don't think all the guys do that. Understanding what you need to use to assure that clean egg going in, cleaner egg going into the hatchery. I think Bruce's comments on floor eggs, night eggs, and determining what goes into your system, spot on. And then having a hatchery manager who's committed to bringing all these eggs from different sources and making it all work, providing the feedback back to the supplier farms in terms of egg sanitation, all proved critical to making it work.
Again, we're real just beginning this, so we're basically at where Bruce was talking about going a week on, week off, or putting down a few blocks that are, and then switching back and trying to make adjustments in the hatchery. And we've seen anything from hatcheries that it was very obvious at the very beginning that we could pull and had no increase whatsoever, all the way to 4% 7 days. So it's real hatchery dependent. And I think a lot of people, what we're learning on this thing as we get started with it, is a lot of people want to know, what's the big thing that's going to make you pull out your antibiotics and be able to continue business as usual without having any issues. And I really don't think you're going to find that. I think what we're learning is it's a whole change in mindset of paying attention to every little detail.
Thanks. Now, in growing programs where you've specifically worked to reduce the use of antibiotics, what things have you changed at the farm level which you think have contributed to maintaining flock performance?
So that's a big question, and I obviously can't answer that in 5 minutes, but I think I can give you some categories that we look at. We have looked at changing our flow. In other words, moving away from multi-age farms, which are pretty typical in the turkey industry, moving to all in, all out facilities, and that makes a difference. We are looking a lot closer at certain environmental cues, factors, things like carbon dioxide or humidity, in terms of how we ventilate. In the old days, we would just ventilate based on temperature, right? And now I think we understand a lot more. I think right now we're in the process of trying to get the tools that would give us rapid feedback. So something that would Bluetooth information to a smartphone, whether it's the growers or the service guys, on what the humidity levels did overnight, for example, or what carbon dioxide did overnight, and using that to help us manage barns better. I think we have spent a lot of time on biosecurity, in part because of avian flu, and we've also spent a lot of time on cleaning and disinfection of barns and downtime management, because in part of food safety concerns. And I think that there is no one thing that solves all the problems, but a combination of those concerns play a huge role in whether we're going to be successful in either growing a bird without antibiotics or dramatically reducing our use of antibiotics. I'll stop there for now.
You know, I agree with all that Brian says there. It's, you know, I think the part about the farm, I described this process that we're doing, which is developing, you know, this evolving definition of an ABO Pharma Naevia farmer, and that's a really helpful thing. And we got to it because we kind of left it out when we started a long time ago. We almost made it invisible to the farmer that we were transitioning, and that, in retrospect, probably a mistake to some degree. We needed to involve them earlier. They're heavily involved now. But the process, because we were doing several things, we were working very hard on the hatchery ourselves. We worked really hard on the feed. Yes, we pulled the antibiotics out of the feed, but we put a whole bunch of stuff back in. Actually, ABF, no antibiotic ever kind of feed programs are much relatively more expensive than your old feed, because we run a lot of probiotics. We run, we're really, you know, working on the whole feed package to make sure that it's the best possible way to run NAE. So that was kind of invisible to the farmer. So most of it we were kind of working on to make them successful without them having to change their life very much. But what became obvious is that some really traditionally good growers finishing at the top all the time in the ranking, some of them didn't make the transition to NAE as well and kind of fell to the middle of the pack. And actually some middle kind of growers ended up higher on the list because their management style had a tendency to kind of be more successful in an NAE kind of thing. And it helped us kind of look at okay, what obviously the type of farm and the type of farmer has to kind of evolve, and we need to help folks with that. And the other thing we came to realize, it's not for everybody. You know, there's some farms and some farmers that shouldn't do it. They actually don't want to do it. It's too much. It's more work than they signed up for. There's easier ways to go through life, and actually we've had some farmers decide they didn't want to be a part of that. That's okay. It happens for other reasons too. So this is one of those things that once you get clearer and clearer and clearer, the people that are successful have a little different kind of makeup than maybe before, which is a good thing.
We've done a lot of stuff on the farm level, and as far as feed's concerned, it's a little difficult to say which things have really been successful because we weren't treating before and we're not treating now. So I guess on the farm level, the biggest thing that we've done is improved housing on those complexes. So we are able to ventilate those houses properly, so we reduce moisture in those houses to decrease bacterial loads. Downtime, we put a lot of emphasis on downtime. The feed, we went through all the probiotics and the antibacterial products, but again, it's hard for us to really pick out which one of those has really been successful.
I think that's probably the larger challenge, is that antibiotics suppressed a lot of environmental factors that were influencing what was happening, and now that has been removed. I don't think what seems from complex to complex, the response to the program can vary considerably. And so I'll ask this to Bruce more than anything, on your NAE program, is that kind of relatively cast in stone program you're offering, or really did you have to adapt it, move things up and down to react to those different situations? Because how it responds to a complex up on the eastern shores can be very different from an Arkansas complex, for example.
Yeah, definitely there was, every place we went as we progressed through different operations, they acted very differently. So having to learn new stuff, just like in the hatchery kind of thing. Every area has its own set of challenges as it relates to that. Sometimes it's a geographic component within the growing area. We had one of those, still do struggle with this one kind of group of growers in a particular area that just are not running as smooth as the rest of the complex. So all that kind of gets you into this studying stuff like you've never studied it before. So why is that? What's going on there? Is it them or the farms or the geography? Something about the soil? Something about, everything else? Get into all that.
Now, several of you mentioned downtime. Is there any guide then on minimum downtime that you need?
The killer is when actually I'd say this: layout is magic. Is like magic. It's the most powerful tool you have to manage microbiology in a chicken house or a turkey house, for that matter. It's very powerful. And to not respect it, that's a wrong. That has always been wrong, but it gets really wrong at a higher level with no antibiotics ever. So you have to have a lot of discipline, and you have to have the whole company behind it to be disciplined. So yes, we'd like more chickens. Yes, the price is good. What do you think about placing more farms? Well, that will wreck layout. How about we not do that? Or how about we think about it another way, kind of thing. So protecting layout and having it be kind of culturally ingrained. That might sound easy to people, but it's a hard thing, but it's super powerful. And that's the only thing I'd say. It's kind of a higher level of respect for layout than you ever had before. You probably should have been doing that before, but if you didn't do it before, do it now.
I agree completely. I think in the past we kind of let the plants dictate the layout, and then you try to work back to where you want to be. Where here, on this, you just basically need to set a time and say, okay, we're going to do 16, 18 days or whatever. And as far as a number, in my opinion, you need to be as long as you can, and as long as you can, but still allow your growers to have enough flocks that they can be successful.
So I think when I look at downtime, and I really struggled with this because how are you going to define downtime? And I think it's easy to say, well, we'll have 14 days down. But in my mind, I've started looking at dry clean downtime. So I'd be specifically talking about a brooder house, something that we clean out every flock. And I'm really not as concerned how many days between birds leaving and birds coming back in as I am how long did that barn sit dry and clean. And it seems to me that that's probably more important in turkeys. Now, how long is long enough? I think it depends on which complex you're talking about geographically. I think it depends on whether you're talking about an all-in, all-out farm, which requires fewer days, versus a multi-age facility, and then the challenge that's unique to that farm. I think if you ask me just to give you a number, somewhere around 5 days dry clean downtime in a brooder house is probably getting somewhere about where you want to be. But once again, it depends on those other factors. So.
Now, Brian, you mentioned the possibility of more single-age farms for turkeys. One thing that we haven't talked about for either broilers or turkeys is, in the future, will any of this move for reduced antibiotic usage have an impact on the size of farms?
I think for turkeys, the driving force for the size of the farm going forward is going to be what can we cash flow in a year. That's going to be a huge driving force. And then once we get that number, we figure out how to do it. But I do see a trend towards all-in-all facilities, yes.
How about on the broiler side? Will this impact farm size, do you think?
You know what happens on big farms? That I don't think it's innately necessarily large farm or small farm. That's not the kind of, it's the problem that we see with large farms is that the same, a certain amount of labor, let's say if a farm family of 2 was taking care of 4 chicken houses and doing good. That's a good, that's, you know, both of them working hard and caring for 4 chicken houses. They decide to get 2 more, but no more help. So, okay, you can beat the big farm up and its performance deteriorates, but it's associated with the fact that they attempted to do the same amount of labor on a whole lot more chickens. And so the idea that, and that is some of the economy of scale for them is just that. So that's a problem I see on, if you could have all single house farms with 2 people working in them, I'd take that. That'd be good. I'd like more of that. Having said that, that's pretty unrealistic, and what you kind of need to focus on is here's a farm, does it have adequate care? Is there enough folks here doing the right stuff to care for these chickens? That's the deal. So it's always been like that, but again, a lot of these things have always been like that. Just a little bit more kind of pronounced these days.
One other thought on that, the turkeys. So turkeys tend to be a lot more labor intensive. Just a lot more goes into the management of the barns, is my sense. And we have a very good feel how much a family can handle. And I think you're much less likely to see more than the standard 3-barn farm turkeys, just because we know that's what a family can typically handle. And I don't see dramatic change in that. Letting a family overextend themselves is usually a prescription for disaster. So.
Now, on the single age farms, now with Tom's, some companies have gone to brood and move. Would you do brood and move for hens, or would it be just all in, all out in the same house?
Hens would be all in, all out.
In the same house?
Well, either we'll brood in one house and move, or brood in the same house and just open the house up.
Like broilers.
We currently use both strategies right now. So.
Got a question here. What non-antibiotic alternatives have shown the most promise in preventing and treating disease?
So in our system, we have looked at several non-antibiotic products. We currently use a prebiotic and the probiotic in our rations, both conventional and antibiotic free. We have seen differences in products based in our own internal trials, and we continuously look at new products as they come on board. I do think that those products will have a place in our production system, but I'm not going to give you any names.
Oh, well, yeah, I was thinking more categories of things that are working, yeah.
Well, I think that the initial challenge is obviously, as a supplier, as the antibiotics are removed, is a lot of producers are looking for, a single solution in some cases. It's going to be that like-for-like replacement, and I don't think that's currently a possibility. As we talked about, you have to have a flexible program depending on the individual needs of those complexes. I think you need certainly the prebiotic, probiotic, and organic acid is a kind of, even just the foundation to the program, but that needs to be adapted to reflect the individual challenges you're going to get in your different geographies or different bird sizes.
Yeah, I think the whole area is, I think the part that both these guys said is that if you're looking for something that works like an antibiotic, it's Antibiotics are pretty fantastic, and that's why we're having this discussion, because they're pretty fantastic, and people want to, respect them. So, and we should. So to think that there's this other thing that acts like that's pretty fantastic, and yet it's not important in all the other ways. I don't. It's probably a good thing to move on from that idea, thinking about the fact that most of these other products are useful, and you need to work on them. You need to commit a lot of energy to figuring it out, because it's not easy, and it takes a lot of kind of infrastructure or thought and trials, to figure it out for your system. And all of them have a little bit of this whole idea about managing the microbial makeup of the intestinal tract in a chicken or turkey is a big deal. And and particularly turkeys, keeping them in the right kind of flora for the whole life is a big challenge. It's a challenge with chickens. Every time something comes in, whether it be coccidiosis or migration, puts a challenge in the kind of microbial flora of the gut. So you often do the product in combination with a management thought, and that is the right thing. That's a good thing. How can we make this transition from being a very young chicken to a teenager go a little bit smoother? Well, this product will help them, but this management change will probably help just as much or even more. So you got to look at the way you raise chickens in addition to looking for products.
This is a tough one. For several reasons. The first one is deciding which one of these products you're going to try, because you truly have no idea how many of these products are out there until you announce that you're taking a complex antibiotic free, and you find out pretty quick. So once you do decide what you want to try, usually you're trying more than one thing. So trying products like this in feed, and it's very difficult in a production system. Most of us aren't lucky enough to have a complex that has 2 meals where you can run 2 complete different feeds or something like that. So and then the other issue is with these antibiotic-free complexes, they're seasonal. You can have issues at certain times where you don't have with the product and stuff. So the problem is it's really difficult to know whether they're working and if they're doing anything.
Now, how has the relationship within the integrated company changed between the veterinarian and the flock advisor or service tech group? Or has it changed?
Someone once said, never let a good process go to waste. And we've seen our share of crises over the last few years. I think there's no doubt in my mind that the influence that our technical staff have had over the last few years has gone up in terms of our ability to increase the emphasis on things like biosecurity or cleaning or attention to detail in the things that I outlined. We have seen a shift in the focus on that, no doubt about it.
Really successful companies have always had a pretty intense relationship, I think, between the field people and the veterinarian. This has just gotten more intense, really, and useful. We're talking every day about what people. Those are the folks seeing the birds the most, seeing them all the time. Notice little changes. Can communicate those if asked and if encouraged, and if given the right forum to have that conversation. So I think that's a part, maybe more than anything, is a recognition that you got to interact and you got to provide the right opportunity to do that. So if it's at your weekly meeting where you're actually asking and listening, as opposed to something dictated, it's a more kind of personal relationship and interactive and encouraged, kind of interchange. So again, probably should have been there all along, but this stepped it up.
One thing we're learning is of course, this interaction between the veterinarians and the service techs is essential. But you're going to be relying on these individuals to make decisions on these farms for you, because with the way we're set up, you just can't get to all the farms. And so you have to have good trained people that you can trust to inform you on what's going on the farm, so you can then help them make decisions. And then the other thing that we're learning is, that the amount you're spending on service techs is not a category you want to win in AgriStats. So, you really need to make sure you have enough people that they can spend enough time on those farms.
Now, just for people who aren't involved in producing broilers and turkeys every day, when you read about the Veterinary Feed Directive, sometimes I have a vision of the veterinarian who's going to be sitting there with the prescription pad all day and writing out prescriptions. So is the industry going to need more veterinarians, or do you think we can accomplish this within the existing structures that we have in our companies?
Good question. I think there have been varying degrees of leanness in companies as it relates to veterinary care. You can see all that already changing, So some companies that never had a veterinary relationship or veterinarian on staff have added them. So you can kind of see that changing. Then the kind of veterinary to bird ratio, if that's what you're looking for, I don't, or that's what could be discussed. I think it varies quite a bit. It should probably vary quite a bit as it relates to your systems, your geography, kind of how the whole thing's set up, and the talent you have in the flock advisor area. And so I don't think there's any one number, but if the general thought is there kind of a more, probably likely a few more veterinarians involved? Yeah, I think so.
And that's something that we were talking about earlier, the challenge is just the availability of veterinarians to fulfill those roles currently. And I think that a lot of the integrators are going to look further back into the university structure to actually get veterinarians, a relatively naive skill set at that point as they're coming out of college. But just there's a kind of almost a small time bomb waiting to happen, I think, in the veterinary world. Just the availability of, if there's a requirement for the VFD for higher method vets, is where to find them, and to make sure they're trained to the right level and spending that time to transition the knowledge from the older veterinary staff to the newer recruits.
So I think in addition to what these guys have said, one trend that I've seen increasingly being used in the last year that's only going to increase is the use of our electronic devices. So I have service staff who will text me mortality and a picture of what they're seeing, or several pictures, and we'll make decisions based on that. And we're moving very quickly to equipping all of our service staff with an equivalent of an iPad and the ability to access the internet wherever they are, so they can very quickly communicate with me or our other vet to make decisions on what to do. So I think you're going to see more of that coming down the road.
How important do you think it is to the poultry industry for it to maintain a distinction between the use of medically important antibiotics and antibiotics that are only used in poultry or livestock?
It's important. It's an important thing to kind of think through and talk about and understand. But one of the things that we feel strong about is that if you're trying to convince or if you're trying to communicate that all to the consumer, and expect them to kind of understand it and become an antibiotic expert? I don't think so. They, in our sense, we spend a lot of time interacting with consumers, kind of going back and forth, and have for a long time on this subject. And first of all, don't underestimate their concern, and don't make fun of it. They're super concerned, and to make light of it will be a mistake. The second thing is they don't really want you to make them antibiotic experts. Start describing all the different classes of antibiotics and all the different aspects of them, and they don't have time for that. They can understand perhaps, well, they can certainly understand if you use them or you don't. That's really clear. And everything in between is probably a migration toward, in our sense, it's a migration towards that, which is, yes, there are differences in antibiotics. Some are more important to humans than others. Even FDA's definition used to be not medically important, right? And then it changed to, in the last year, I don't know if you saw this, but it changed to not currently medically important. Okay, so the message there for me at least is, I get that these particular set of drugs are called not medically important today. Having said that, next year might be a different set of drugs, might be a different set of, if you want to lose a consumer in some kind of deal like that, start changing the definition every year, and you might as well stop. So anyhow, yes, it's important. Yes, it's important to migrate through those thoughts, but to take a consumer through that and expect them to hang with you, I don't think so.
I agree completely. I think the only thing the public really understands is either you're using them or you're not. However, I do think that message is something that, whether you're using medically imported or not, is something that your customers definitely understand. So, I do think it's important that you can communicate that to the people that are to your customers, and then as far as the public, it's either you're using them or you're not.
So once again, I think turkeys are longer lived, and we've certainly taken a stance that if our birds get sick, the right thing to do is to treat them. We're not going to let unhealthy birds get into the food supply. The pressure that I feel is either antibiotic-free or conventional, and I suspect that is going to be the major defining line, as opposed to trying to parse meanings more narrowly than that.
I do want to remind everyone we're going to be having a open question and answer forum in just a few minutes, so start thinking about your questions. Now, there are some markets where there is a movement to try and create a category separate from never ever antibiotics, where they do talk about restricting the use of medically important antibiotics. And one is USDA process verified certified responsible antibiotic use standard. And this is available through school lunch. And that's a very defined market. Now, do you think that that has any opportunity for traction, since it's not the general public, it's through the school lunch program?
My opinion is like what Jeff just described. It's a customer requirement that's relatively spelled out and has a certain set of criteria. So it's basically a spec for a product about what you can use and what you can't use. In that sense, it's good and useful. It's a responsible kind of reduction program, relatively complicated for anybody to understand. We would not suggest that it's useful at all in a label format because consumers don't get that. And having said that, okay, actually we got about 12 million birds a week that fit that criteria, and so from our perspective, it's a fine thing from a customer viewpoint that here's our requirements, and do you have meat that fulfills that? Okay, good. And the second part, however, that's a disconnect from our perspective is that it would be a useful kind of labeling criteria of any sort from a consumer perspective. But that's not what it's being asked to be. So, yeah, I think that kind of thing. And there's more of those. I think Jeff mentioned this too. Some customers have been very explicit about their antibiotic use requirements and put them up on their website and or their consumer communication. And they can be relatively complex. But having said that, they have some rules and they are a evolution through kind of reduction thought, which is good. I would consider them kind of on their way to NAE though, as a process to move through to get to NAE eventually.
Because when McDonald's for instance, made their announcement regarding the use of medically important antibiotics for the broilers that go into their chicken products, I was somewhat hopeful that might be, okay, here's someone with some marketing muscle, let's see if they can make this stand and have it hold. But of course the jury's out as to whether or not that'll hold.
And you know what? Even when those of us that do this are in this business, when we're talking to each other, and you say a program, almost all of us go, okay, just tell me, do you use this? Do you use this? Do you use this? So you can read the verbiage and you still have a lot of questions. So it ends up going so let's just talk about what do you use where? That's what you end up doing. That's how complicated it can get, to kind of work through the verbiage. So
Very good. Do we have any questions from the audience now for our panelists?
Hi, my name is Mira Demova, and I am with Pilgrims. The question I have is, what do you think is the challenge for the animal industry to be working with human medicine and hospitals, etc.? So, in the animal industry, we've only had a handful of drugs that we've used for decades that are still viable. And in human medicine, a lot of the antibiotics develop resistance very quickly. So should we not be working with human medicine to teach them cycling and more of the practices we have in order to preserve our antibiotic use and efficacy?
We used to have MD on staff at Purdue, really interesting guy, really good guy. And he was very interested in poultry medicine and very complimentary of poultry medicine. And, the one thing, to your point, that I kept saying to him is, his name was Roger. I go, Roger, have I ever described a layout to you? Do you ever think that might be an appropriate thing to do at a hospital once in a while? And of course the answer is, I'd love to empty the hospital every so often. And having said that, it costs money. And I go, yeah, it does. That's exactly what it does. It costs money to leave a house empty. How about you empty a hospital every once in a while and call it layout? And that'd be good. And of course, that's not going to happen. But the idea, I think, that's really good is interacting with more and more human medicine folks, whether they be nurses and or MDs, and talk as much as you possibly can. First of all, every time I talk to them, I got something to learn too. So this One Health program, from a perspective of the world, is one set of microbiology, and perhaps we ought to think about it in a bigger sense. I think that's a really good program that's probably yet to really be all that it could be.
Any other questions? Oh.
Good morning, Vicki Seeker with Canadian Hatching Egg Producers, and this has been really informational so far and beneficial, so thank you. My question for all of you, you all commented about the value of having excellent support staff, veterinary advice, flock advisors. In Canada, most of our farms are independently owned, and there's varying access to support staff, in some cases even poultry veterinarians. Some producers receive a lot of technical information and support on the farm, others not so much. I was wondering if you had advice or comment on for farmers who are essentially going it alone. They're managing their place, they're trying to reduce the amount of antibiotics they're using. Do you have any advice for them and how they could proceed?
I think educational programs always are very well received, depending on many aspects of poultry production. And I've seen success in the AI outbreaks of the veterinarians pulling all the growers together, and usually the feedback is universally pretty positive. It's seen as a way to improve their production process and help them. And so I think, especially independent farmers, can be quite an isolating situation. And so more educational in groups, and realise that a lot of the problems are shared across the regions, can be probably a good place to start.
Poultry federations, have always been important, but I think they're taking on a kind of they have another responsibility now than maybe before. They have a responsibility to help farmers understand consumers, or being a little bit more consumer-centric. I get the independence thing, it's super strong in farming community in general. Having said that, you're raising meat for people to eat that don't know you, and you need to get to know them. And poultry federations probably have a much kind of a bigger, wider range of opportunities in that way than they have in the past, 15 years, I think.
Now, Brian, we do have a number of independent turkey producers still, but I guess we have consulting veterinarians that work with them.
Yes, so Cargill does not have any independent producers. I don't personally have to work with any independents. However, in my past I did. If there were independent growers that sent birds to one of my facilities, I was still available, and infrequently I helped them if they had specific questions. As you asked your question, I thought about the independent table egg folks that are really becoming popular in Missouri, and it has been difficult to outreach to those folks, especially with the whole concern about AI. How do we get the word out to this group, right? And we still struggle. I don't have a good answer for you right now. I think if they're sending birds to my plant, then certainly I have the ability to interact with them. If they're outside of that scope, then it's a lot tougher. It's not a very satisfactory answer, but
Thank you.
I'm Panelists from Nepal. I'm Sid Miller. Just my simple, I want to share something that since last 6 years, we are not using any antibiotic on our feed, but we use some herbs which acts as antibiotics, and we have very good performance comparison to other company who use antibiotic, and our feed is free of that. So we find that the product is very good and very healthy. That is my just suggestion to this forum, that you kindly think over on that type of option also. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mark Bland. I'm a consulting poultry veterinarian. I have a question for you gentlemen. Where do you draw the line where you have situations where you have increased mortality, which may or may not, some folks may look at as an animal welfare issue, and try to keep the flock ABF?
so I can answer that one fairly easily. We do run conventional birds and antibiotic-free birds out of the same complex. And for the roughly 15% or so that fall out because they're medicated, we just shunt them into the conventional program. And we have guidelines for that. I get involved in those decisions, and the welfare of the bird comes first. Full stop.
Yeah, I'd say add on to that what Brian said. You don't overcommit yourself to, in other words, you don't sign up the whole complex or the whole plant for NAE. It just won't work. I mean, it won't work that way. If you do, you know you're going to compromise the other part. And honestly, we've been really absolutely we didn't go into it with that. We went into it with that in mind, such that we don't scrutinize to any degree. We measure, yes, and say out loud how many treated flocks, but everybody in the company recognizes that's absolutely the right thing to do. And we talk about this, and I feel strong about it, is we're proud of those farms and proud of those flocks. Glad to have done that. But don't overcommit your complex to NAE. The other part is we early on we wrote a process verified program around no antibiotics ever. And in the process verified program, we put in some criteria around the fact that we will treat flocks when the health is appropriate, and you can check us on that. And as a matter of fact, that's an audited component of the no antibiotics ever. So you could lose your certification for no antibiotics for not treating a flock. That's important. I feel strong about both of them. Is treat the ones that need to be treated, say it out loud, be proud of it. Don't overcommit your kind of meat block to NAE. And all the parts of managing the treatments is write it down and be held accountable to it.
We have both situations. We have a complex where we're about half and half, and in that complex, if we had to treat, we would do just like Brian said. We would just move them over to the other program. And we also have complexes that we're 100% NAE. In those complexes, basically, it would be a decision by the veterinarian. So we didn't outline a specific number of mortality or anything. It's on the veterinarian's judgment to make that call. The problem we run into is in those complexes, you have customers that say, we don't want you to use antibiotics, but if you have some sick birds, we want you to treat them, but don't send us the chicken. So if you're 100%, it makes it really difficult, to what are you going to do with this one flock of birds that you've now treated and the rest of the complex is going to one customer.
Hello, my name is Olivier Bialik. I'm coming from France. On this company, we do algae product, well, product made of algae, seaweeds, for to raise birds and other species. We've conducted trials with chicken, trying to raise them without antibiotics, and we succeeded at 93% on the trials of 1,600,000. Now we've made some arrangement, and I would like to know if you do the same or not. So I've got a technical question, and the rest is more about label and prices. Well, the first question is, I'm not sure you talked about it, but did you have to arrange the density of your flocks, and did you change the density? I'm thinking of turkey mainly also, and in broilers. The second question, and I will just ask them, and then you will decide to answer. About labels, I don't know about the US situation. Do you label antibiotic free on your products, final products? And the last question, I think is very important. We had this kind of discussion with CP in Asia or in other places also. What is the final price, and can you get more value for your final product?
Okay, so hopefully I can remember all those questions.
The first was the density.
So the first one, on our big toms, we tend to not to change the density because they've got a lot of space anyway. It's probably a little more important in hens, especially regular hens, but once again, the overriding emphasis has been on downtime versus density. But that's not to say that paying close attention to density in hens is not important. I think it also depends on whether you're talking about an all-in-all facility where the pressures are less or lower. And I don't want to say density is not important, but if you have an all-in-all facility with the right amount of downtime, you can make it work. What was the second question? Labeling. So we do have an antibiotic-free product, and we also have a process-verified no-growth promoting product, both of which are labeled, and there is a benefit financially to having an antibiotic-free product. Did I get them all?
Yeah.
Okay.
How about from the broiler perspective on density?
My comment on density is, so most of the problems that antibiotics are aimed at in chickens are very likely between 12 and 24 days. That's not when they're dense. That's not the density is not the problem at that age. Generally, there's lots of space. So density being kind of your biggest. Density becomes an issue in the last week of the flock. That's where density kind of plays a role. Unless you're doing something weird with and this is an appropriate conversation. You may choose to brood differently. We do a lot of third house, half house brooding, and the thought around how you might brood a little bit differently and or migrate a little bit differently. Those are valid pieces, but overall placement density is probably not kind of really super high on the list of things that are going on in ABF programs. Although density is a nice tool for health. Labeling, like Brian says, there's some labels that are not allowed and confusing to people, like we all say antibiotic free. ABF became the term. Well, that's not a labelable set of words. But no antibiotics ever, raised without the use of antibiotics. Some of those are how people have chosen to use the labeling verbiage.
We've definitely increased density, and we feel that it's helpless. I mean, anytime you give birds more room, they perform better. You have to walk a close line with your growers still being able to pay their bills. So usually when you change the density, you have to adjust grower pay. The problem you get into is if a production company decides they want to go antibiotic free and carry it on a label, then you generally have time to develop the program into what you're going to do. But usually if it's a customer driven, there's not a lot of time. So usually you're told you're going to antibiotic free. So if you decide you still want to provide them chicken, then you go antibiotic free. So what you normally end up doing is slowly moving that density while you're building housing and gaining more places to put birds. And what we've seen is when we've done that, as we've increased density, we've definitely seen a improvement in performance.
And good morning, Mario Pence from Cargill Animal Nutrition. When we go to this kind of meeting, we talk a lot about the agent, the pathological issues related to antibiotic-free. From the nutritional point of view, as a nutritionist, my question is, how much your companies are giving attention to the host? Because we know that most of the immune response of the birds are related to good gut health. So 2 questions. Which are the strategies on nutrition to look on that point? And more, how much you are giving attention to the ingredient quality, feed quality, particle sizes, and things that also struggle a lot on the bird and gives chance for the agents to take position, a good position on that work. Thanks.
So it's really hard for a veterinarian to answer a question about what the nutritionist is doing. And I deliberately refrain from even going down that road. But there's no doubt that that plays a role, right? In addition to all the other things we've been talking about. So Liz McGill, our nutritionist, has done, I think, a phenomenal job of addressing at least a couple of things. One is looking at the consistency of the outgoing feeds and ensuring that there is minimal deviation from whatever her desired values were. That was not always the case. Years gone by, and we have gotten a lot better at looking at that. A part of the equation is, as you implied, looking at the raw incoming ingredients and being very careful about where we source our raw products. And then I think finally, we are still learning how to feed an antibiotic-free bird. These birds are even more sensitive to very slight changes, things that we are learning how to measure. And I sort of teased you a little bit earlier, humidity and carbon dioxide. Turkeys, I think, in particular, are just so sensitive, and any minor insult environmentally is enough to back them off feed. And we've spent a tremendous amount of time, more than I can possibly detail in a setting like this, in terms of how to keep these birds on feed. What are the things we need to look at, whether it's crumble consistency and quality, parents, probiotics, temperature spreads, you name it, we've looked at it and are looking at it. I think it's a very important area, suffice it to say.
From the microbiologist's point of view, I think that a lot of the responses we see in the bird, obviously, there's a lot of data to show that the diet will impact that significantly. But I think that as we've seen as there's antibiotics have been pulled out of the diet, the microbiota has actually broadened significantly, and so it consequently have a lot more variable response. But I think traditionally these impacts of what Brian was talking about here, be measured at a microbiological level within the bird. But I really think that the future where the research needs to be focusing is what the immune status of that bird does in reflection of what's happening in that microbiota. And that's less and less information on that currently, but it needs a direction, needs more investigation, because ultimately, as you were saying, is how it impacts the bird is what you're looking for. So I think that the host, as you say, I agree with you, receives not as much attention as it could do. And certainly even on a microbiological level, you see significant differing responses even from different genetic strains, or certainly from 3 main genetic strains of the birds. So.
Hi, I'm Carrie Elias from GMP Company. I had a question. How are you using like culture sensitivity in making your decisions? Are you like every time you have an infection submitting samples, or to make a database? Are you using that at all?
We use a fair bit of laboratory support, and sensitivities are done automatically when samples are submitted. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that we take samples 100% of the time, because our service guys know, for the most part, what the pattern of infection is. But a sizable percentage of our cases have samples submitted to the lab.
Yeah, I'd say that's a pretty fair depiction. It's used a lot and tracked a lot. If you have a particular disease in an area where there's several flocks or several farms, and you're getting a picture of what's going on, you might do the first 5 and then go, you know what, I have a sense of what the antibiotic sensitivities are of this particular piece. So you might not do some after that. Having said that, you're also always doing cause and effect, which is, yes, I know the sensitivity, yes, I'm using this particular product, and yes, I'm checking the outcome. And if you go 2 flocks in a row where the outcome is not responding to that particular antibiotic, you do a whole nother set of sensitivities and investigation on if you had the bug right and if you called it right as it relates to the sensitive piece. So big tool, huge tool, used probably, when I describe this, we were talking about the relationship between human medicine. When I describe to a human doctor how much sensitivity and work that we do, they can't believe how much work goes on at the poultry level as it relates to taking a bug and checking its sensitivity. They wouldn't dream about doing all that.
Guys, appreciate your time. Question I have that kind of not directly addressed, but Bruce and Jeff, I'd really particularly like your opinion on it, but certainly Brian, you can comment as well. Is look at your crystal ball, and 5 years down the road, where do the ionophores fit in this discussion? And where do you see their usage going long term?
That's a tough one.
That's why they pay you the big money.
The issue we have is with ionophores being labeled as antibiotics. The pressure we're seeing from customers are to move antibiotic free, and NAE has become kind of the buzzword. So when customers are coming to us asking for NAE, then immediately that throws out your ionophores. So I definitely see a decrease in their use because of, you'll see more and more customers going NAE.
My answer is pretty simple and similar, is can't use it in NAE. That's easy. So as you migrate through non-vax ever programs, they go away. The speed at which that'll happen, Brett, I think is directly related to your ability to succeed without them. So if you can figure out all the things that you need to figure out, change all the things that you need to change to be successful with products other than ionophores and other antibiotics, that's the speed at which they'll go away.
Okay. Do we have one more question? This will be our last question.
We've heard a lot this morning about the use of probiotics and the microbiome. And you've also all mentioned, I think, the important role of the breeders and looking at that in an ABF system. As production veterinarians for integrators, how do you see the role of the primary breeders and their potential impact, given what their antibiotic use is on an antibiotic-free type production system?
Really good question and really appropriate, or really a good thought. As I understand it, and I think it's pretty true, the primary breeders pulled antibiotics out of their programs probably 15 years ago. I hope 10, 15 years ago. So they started raising birds with the pressure of with the absence of the crutch, if you want to call it that. So the birds are being selected all the time without that benefit. That's a step in the right direction, but other characterizations associated with perhaps growth curve and growth rate management is probably going to play in as time goes on. And feather cover is probably a little bit more something to think of. Paw health, all the things that probably were going on in the selection scheme probably got jumbled up a little bit and needed to, as it relates to the fact that antibiotics these birds are going to be raised in a program without the benefit or without the support of an antibiotic program kind of thing. So yeah, I think it probably jumbled up their kind of criteria. It probably needed to, and they're probably still adjusting, as best I can tell, to some of those kinds of things.
You know, it's interesting. I've gotten to the point in my career where I've been around long enough that I can remember what happened in the last decade. And there was a time where we almost expected that primary breeders would overshoot their mark, and we could see some problems that might be associated with one breed or another. But I think in recent years, in the last 15 years, they have done a phenomenal job of improving the durability of that bird. And I benefit from that, right? So I do think they have a role to play in that regard, as well as what these guys have said. And I think they've gotten a lot better at giving me a very durable bird.
Well, thank you all for joining us this morning. Please join me in thanking our panelists for participating. And also, I'd like you to please thank our sponsor, DuPont, for helping us put this on today. And I hope that you all have a very good day at the show today, and have a good trip home from Atlanta. Thanks. Bye.